Cool. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Harebrained Games. This time we're going to talk to you about Enemy Coast Ahead, but not this one. This one is the one I did a video for last year and was dutifully impressed with this wonderful linear story-driven rich game. Maybe it was a year and a half ago. Irrelevant. Anyway, this covered the dam busting raids that the British attacked German dams, and using this system, we are just now on the precipice of getting a brand new version of this, as you just saw, Enemy Coast Ahead, the Doolittle raid. Now this is a little close to my heart because I have a lot of family history. My uncle served in World War II in the Philippines, and that was a story. So this Doolittle raid and all of the movies I saw growing up, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, all of that stuff, this really hit a sweet spot. I really liked the Dam Buster raid, so I was curious what they were going to do, what Mr. White was going to accomplish with this. What was going to happen? Was it going to be Dam Busters Doolittle edition, or was it going to have a life of its own? Well, let's take a look and see what this game's about. Okay, so let's go over some of the components that come in the Doolittle raid. First off, who's going to miss this glorious map? Apologies for the glare. I'm going to turn that away a little bit. This is your map, and as you can see, it's a rather large behemoth paper map. However, I have covered it over with a nice thick sheet of glass. And you'll notice that they're divided into 4 sections that match the 4 different areas. This is your planning, this is your naval section, your flight section, and then the landing section. So everything's there. You also have 3 specific sheets that actually map down to the level of the city for the different cities you're going to target with the B-17 bombers when you're going to do the actual attack runs. So basically this map here is for all of the high-level stuff, and then when you zoom in, it's almost like a little miniature mini-game of its own to actually attack the targets. Interesting. We'll get back to that later. Also comes with dice and a lot of chits. A whole lot of them. But because this game operates in a sort of a linear, sequential, modular fashion, it's actually pretty interesting because of all the chits that you have. I have arranged these in such a fashion that they're kind of chronological. Like when I'm dealing with the planning phase, these are the chits that are going to be relevant to that. When I go into the naval phase, I'm going to have a different set of counters, and then over here in this one, I'm going to have the attack phase. You're going to have those counters, and then the landing phase. I mean, it's a little bit mixed in, so it's not expressly sequential, but at least it's organized in such a way that I only have to actually deal with a certain section of these chits at a time when I'm playing the game. And of course, fuel is pretty much everywhere in a lot of the phases. So there's also day and night cubes, for example, or chits, so that basically when you're attacking Tokyo, each city has its own set of chits for the resistance that you're going to meet. And so these are the day versions of those chits. So for Tokyo, you'll have the day version, and then you'll have the night version. I didn't incorporate those. We'll see how it goes. And dice, as I've already mentioned. Finally, you get, beyond the manual, you're going to get the classic Enemy Coast Ahead cheat sheets that really sort of negate the requirement of having to reference the manual a lot. Beautiful maps and charts. They've worked very hard to make sure that these actually give you pretty much everything you need. It'll be relatively rare once you're familiar with the game to ever have to refer to the manual for a whole lot more than just maybe tiny nuances and such. And even then, you're going to have references cited on these cheat sheets for everything. This is the planning turn, which maps to that. You've got your naval turn, which maps to that, which this is awesome. We'll get into that later. You have your flight turn, and this is the whole stuff you're going to do for the flight when you finally get those bombers off the ships. Then you're going to have an attack turn, and this is where you delve down into that area there. And finally, you're going to have the landing check, where you're going to land on someplace. Somehow, some way, depending on how you negotiated it, you will land around here. So that's basically the components that come inside of the game. Now we're going to take a little bit of a summary look at the different sections of the game and how they play out before getting to my final conclusions. So here we are starting off on the mission, and we're going to do the planning phase, which is the first of 4 phases in the Doolittle raid. The planning phase has 4 separate months, and in each month you're going to be taking on a series of choices historically mapping to and parallel to the choices that Doolittle was making when he was choosing how to train and equip and inform people about this ultra-secret Doolittle raid. We'll begin with January. January is the start of it all, and the first choices you're going to make in January are how soon you're going to inform external agents about the mission. Now, why would you want to do that? Because the very first choice you make is also the very last step that you're going to plan, which is landing. You need to start off right off the bat deciding where your planes are going to land after they've dropped their ordnance in Tokyo. To that, you're going to use these 3 people here. You're going to use Thompson and Stilwell and Nimitz. And these guys are going to be placed somewhere along the track for where you want to inform these units. Now, the key is, the earlier you inform them, the better the odds that eventually you'll be able to convince Thompson to let the Russians are okay with you landing after the mission. You also want Stilwell for China, because China is a little bit easier to convince, but there is some prep work in preparing landing sites in China that may or may not be compromised, and so there's risk there. And finally, you want Admiral Nimitz to be informed, because you want to take advantage of his task force ships, which will give you a better odds and better protection as you're sailing across the waters to the point at which you launch the aircraft to fly over to Tokyo. Now, how we do this is going to be part of what's called a diplomacy check. Now, diplomacy checks take place after every month up through April. So we're going to do an example here. I'm going to put Thompson. I'm going to take a risk and inform him in February instead of January. Stilwell, I think I'm going to try and put him in the same boat. And Nimitz, I'm going to go ahead and risk him in March. Now, why would I do that? Because of these numbers here. One of the currencies that you have that you're going to constantly be dealing with is the currency of secrecy. I call it a currency loosely, but ultimately it is the bitter currency that's running through your entire operation. Secrecy is a resource that aids the enemy, in this case Japan, in trying to find out more about your mission, to interrupt and disrupt and cause damage to your mission. And the greater the secrecy number, that risk, the better the odds that you're going to run into some severe problems later on in the mission. So you want to keep that secrecy value low as much as possible, though you're going to have to eat into a little bit if you want to add any additional advantages to it. Now, we're going to do diplomacy checks as an entirely separate segment of this video, because it does have ramification. It's a little bit of its own kind of miniature set of steps. But suffice to say that in January you make the big decision about when you're going to inform these guys, and obviously the people that they're dealing with. You have Stalin and Chang, and of course Doolittle. Now, Doolittle's a little interesting because you can have him do a lot, or you can have him do little. Har har. Ultimately, Doolittle is always involved in the mission. This is the head kahuna. This is the guy making the choices. If you want him involved in a very strong way, but you don't want any secrecy penalties, you keep him face up and you put him in one of the boxes on each of the months, and you will give you that advantage. For example, if I put him here, he's going to give me an extra +1 to the die roll, which could be pivotal, because if you look, rolling an 11 or more, not an easy thing. You're going to need a little bit of help, and part of the help is in these briefing and urgency counters. Once each turn, you can brief each one of these guys at least once, adds another +1 to your die roll. Urgency, each turn you can add more and more urgent markers to make it even more likely that you'll get that, but each of these adds once again to the secrecy risk. And so you've got to make a judgment call there. Are you going to start off right off the bat with a high probability that your secrecy is going to be compromised? That's a choice that you have to make. Now, one of the things about Doolittle is if you keep him here and you use him, Mr. Doolittle, you're going to get that bonus, but you're not going to be able to get any of the other bonus. However, if you flip it over to Doolittle the telephone, then Doolittle is going to be able to do every single one of these benefits all the way across. Now, what's the downside to that? There's going to be a secrecy penalty, because if he's using the phone, there's a strong possibility of people listening in on conversations and making trouble. So that's a choice you can make. Personally, when it's time to go and we start doing this, I'm going to risk the phone thing, because I think I want his benefit every single step of the planning phase. And that's January. Now we'll move on to February. Oh, one more thing. This is also the time when you're going to get ready your airplanes. You're going to choose how many of the 25 bombers you want to start with. Now, the more the merrier as far as doing the maximum amount of damage. However, there are possibilities that your bombers may not even make it to begin the mission. And so that's a judgment call you have to decide. Plus, the greater number of bombers you're preparing, the more it's going to feed into, detrimental aspects like secrecy and delay check, etc. But suffice to say, you're going to start off with, I would personally start off with 15, and that's probably what I'm going to do, just because that's a number I want to try. And that's it for January. Now we're going to go into February. It's February, and you know what that means? It's time to go shopping. Yep, February is about adding and removing and modifying the B-25s that are going to be sent on your way. This is an interesting one because you pretty much have a clean slate. If you want to add every single one of these to your plane, you can, but recognize that each one has benefits and drawbacks alike. Now, some of these are very simple, like de-icers. Well, you might want to add those, and those are pretty powerful if you want to add those to landing. If you want to land in Russia, de-icers are pretty important. Here's some other ones. Oh, I want to add more fuel. Well, the problem is that adding more fuel also adds more weight. Looking at this chart here, you're going to see you've got a weight value here. This is your starting weight. You've got guns and mods. Adding guns and mods is going to affect you in different ways. If you add more ordnance, for example, here, let's do that. Let's do that. Well, look at that. But now we've added 2 mods. Plus now we have to add an additional weight. Look at that. Now that's okay. But what does weight do? Well, the more it weighs, the more you're going to pay for it in fuel costs down the road. Now there's no absolute set value. You will be taking risks that you might be able to pull off going farther on less fuel. But for the most part, the less weight you are, the less likely it is that you're going to be guzzling a little more fuel than you bargained for. Armor plating, another example. You take it off, well, you lose your chance to, you lose some weight, which is great. Of course, if you add extra, then you're going to be able to have your aircraft take 2 hits instead of 1 before crashing. Once again, the Norden bomb sites, they have benefits. Oh, I'm going to switch to the Mark Twain site. These go on, and you can outfit this any way you want, knowing that you're modifying for each mod you're adding. Now, what does the mods do? Well, it delays. It increases the odds that you're going to have a delay in your flight, and a delay in your flight will have downstream consequences, such as not being able to rendezvous with the task force in a reasonable fashion. Anyway, all of these add like a variety of different things that you can look at and go, hey, training, oh no, if I remove the ventral turret, well, not only do I drop weight, which is a good thing, but I also lose a training point, which will become valuable in March. Carburetors and propellers, look at that. I can add carburetor and propeller to this spot. What am I doing? Somewhere here is the engine. Anyway, I can add stuff in there and then once again drop my weight down, and once again that helps me out later, because the lower the weight, the easier it is for me not to lose extra fuel in flight under certain conditions. So that's basically the shopping part of it, where you're actually going over and outfitting your B-25, noting that everything has a trade-off, everything has a benefit, everything has a drawback and or a risk. So that's basically it for February. Now we're going to bleed into March, which is going to have us training our crew. Right, well, January came and went, and we set up who we were going to inform about the mission and when. February, we decided to outfit our B-25s with all the accoutrements we think are necessary in the hopes that we can keep the weight down and avoid any delays. March is all about training. March is how much of a heart do you have? Basically, your first decision, well, I'm going to put Mr. Doolittle here, and he's going to, let's pretend the morale was there. He's going to instantly, because he's the phone side and he's involved, he's going to add some morale because people like it when Doolittle's around. He's a cool guy. Alright, now our first decision is where are we going to actually train? If we train at McClellan over in Sacramento, well, we don't have that far to go, and we're going to get one security value die, and the more of those dies you have, the better off it's going to be long term for keeping security low. If you do McClellan Field, you have one security die, which isn't great, but you also get 2 extra training points because you've got extra time to train. On the other hand, if you're all the way over on the East Coast, you get 2 security die, which I think I'm going to do that, and I'm going to set that there. Then we have some security measures. Now, all of these measures are a real bummer on your crew. You know, if you have to assign extra MPs to guard them, then that's one less die. If you're gonna not let them see their wives, well, that's another X down die. Quarantine, ugh, that's 2 extra die. But honestly, we should do that because that's just the right thing to do, and that's going to give you 2 dice all the way. The more of these dice, you really want more of these dice if you can. In this case, I'm going to add the FBI and drop morale, but I'm not going to do, I'm going to go ahead and let them still hang out with their wives, and I'm not going to add extra MPs. That means it's now time to draw crew. I get to draw 9 fancy crew, and I can draw them randomly, or I can choose and basically add these guys to the aircraft. The aircraft that I'm going to launch over there. I probably should put them on the boat, but we're not going to do that yet. This is for example. Now I have 7 points to spend, and I can spend it on training. 7 training points is good. It means I can choose to say navigation. I'm going to add 1 there. I'm going to add 1 here for hedge hopping. That's 2. I didn't add 50 calibers, so 3. Let's see. I'm going to add 4, 5, because I like evasion, and 6, and oh, what the heck, I'm going to leave it at, I can't do that without 2, so I'm going to flip it over to do extra training. 7, 8. Now that extra training is going to cost me later on. Everything that I get now, I'm going to have to pay for later in some degree. Is there any other ones that I want to do? I don't know. Oh, nope. Before I do that, I'm going to take here. I'm going to roll a die. 2 dice. I have a 6, and so 6 means that I damage 3 of my aircraft are damaged. Crud. And I'm only allowed to take 12 on board, so I'm going to spend an extra morale to roll a 3rd die and add the sum, which adds 2 more. So it was at 5, 6, 7, 8. So there you go. So now I only lose 2. Now only 2 of my ships get damage markers on them, and I will have a chance to repair them later at a cost, but I will do that. So there you go. So that's basically March. I have configured my crew the best that I think I can. I've got extra shits now to add to them, which will give me bonuses in flight. Like, hey, this pilot gives you extra fuel, and this one, ooh, remove, use once, gunner. Ooh, cool, you can remove. That's awesome. I love these bonuses. They please me. Alright, and that's it for March. Now we're going to go on to the last phase of the mission, which is April, which is when we wrap everything up and get ready to head over to the Naval Phase, and we send these suckers over to ships and get them ready to launch onto the waters of the Pacific. Right, now we're at the last month of the planning phase. This is actually a pretty boring looking scenario from this picture, but it's really not. There's actually a ton of stuff that goes on. This little flag kind of belies all the things that actually wind up being done. This is where stuff gets real. This is where your aircraft are heading out, and it's about time to pull the trigger on this mission. I'm going to do a slight bit of a cop-out for time purposes, because I really wasn't hoping this would be an entire run-through of the game, which would take a long time. So instead, I'm just going to walk you through this wonderful briefing and let you know kind of what would have happened. The RV and launch point, when we start this month, we're going to go ahead and place where we think we're going to rendezvous, where we expect we want to be able to launch our ships. These have impacts on prediction later in the naval phase. This is where your crew flies from wherever they're going to the naval air station where they're going to take off, and there is possible that damage will happen when they're flying cross country, hopping over hedges as low as they can go. So there is a kind of a curious little miniature flight sequence that goes on as well. The crane check, loading B-25s. You would think, yeah, there is a possibility of damage. But in this particular section, you can actually repair the damage at the risk of delays. And then we do the last diplomacy check. And if you haven't got a place to land by now, it would be a really good time to go ahead and put everything into it. Hopefully by this time you have succeeded at a diplomacy check, and your crews know where to land. Finally, it's the dreaded delay check, and this is where you take all the things that could have caused a delay during all the planning, and it all comes down to a pair of dice with some modifiers. And delays are uncomfortable. It's not the end of the world, but it's certainly not the start of a good one. And finally, the dreaded security check. This is the thing we've been talking about for all of the reasons why you wouldn't want to just maximize every choice that you have towards what gives you immediate benefit. The mission security risk starts off by the number of dice you roll. You want to roll as many secrecy dice as possible. You want the highest number possible. So, for example, if we did stick with Eglin Field, we would get 2 dice to roll in addition to the one that we get already. If we added any, as we said, we let them stick with their wives, but we did quarantine them, so that's an extra 2 dice, an extra 1 for the FBI. So we basically gave ourselves, at the time that we planned, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dice, I believe, and an extra die because I didn't start off with more than 18 B-25s. I chose 15. I probably could have just gone with 18, and that's the happy number. This is the sad number. Remember all that times when we were over there in January and we were looking at the bonuses for for trying to inform people as late as possible? Well, those are kind of finally coming to roost now, and we have those bonuses that we need to add to this unfortunate value. Then we need to also add for every marker, every briefing marker, every urgency marker, every one that we updated. And if Doolittle had a choice at one point to brief the squadron on the mission, if he chooses to brief the squadron on the mission, it helps with morale in the March time frame, but it is going to add to the security risk. And this risk doesn't go away. It never goes down. This risk is only going to get greater and greater the closer you are to Tokyo. Finally, if any of these 4 events happen, for example, remember the telephone. If Doolittle uses the telephone, then there's a die roll that could be of some ramifications to this security risk. If the squadron got Liberty, which we didn't do when we planned it in March, if the task force is delayed, there's another possibility of security list. And in China, if we choose China as a landing site and we prepared some landing sites and the Japanese find them, that could also compromise our security. And the bottom line is, however that value ends up, this becomes our security track for the rest of the mission. This will follow us through the naval map, through the flight map, and on to the landing map, the denouement, and then the final outcome of our mission. So while this is probably not visually explained, this is the best of the first part of the game, the planning phase. Now, those of you who knew about my previous Dam Buster video and all of its coarse glory knew that I started with the end last time, and I just did the targeting. This is too good of a game no, not that that one wasn't, but this is a fantastic game in so many facets that I simply can't just cut to the chase for these target maps here and just run a mission there and say, yeah, it's great, and roll back. Matter of fact, several people were visibly upset that I didn't actually do a full walkthrough. So what I'm going to do instead is wrap up this initial example of the first phase instead of the last phase of the Doolittle raid, and I will be following it up in coming weeks with an individual video for each of the 4 planning stages stages of this game, in such a way that a full game can be realized from start to finish in all my probably poor decision-making glory. But I want to get to the review of this game, and I want to get this up for people to be able to see this great game as it's starting to hit shelves in the online and offline world. And so what you've seen here is basically the first part of the game, the planning sequence, which I think I would expect you probably may agree is filled with lots and lots of interesting choices. So now we're going to wrap up, go to my final conclusions, and sign off. Wow. What a game. What a game. This is not, as one could possibly fear, Dam Busters Doolittle Edition. Not at all. This stands in its own right as a sterling achievement that goes even beyond the narrative experience of Dam Busters raid. Now, they both have their place. I like them both. I still pull out Dam Busters now on occasion, but this has got to be just everything and more. The core systems have similarities, Dam Busters and Doolittle Raid, for those who have both or are on the fence of whether they need another one or not. But they're different in more regards than they're not. For instance, the Dam Busters phase, it really focuses and narrows in on the actual bombing runs, which was entertaining in a great degree. But, well, here's an example. Dam Busters, I felt like the phases leading up to the actual bombing runs, were interesting. I thought they were clever. I thought that they fed well into the narrative, into the story, into your decision making. You're in the top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, and out you go. But I still thought that, as entertaining as they were kind of a prelude to the meat of the game, which was the actual targeting aspect of it. Yeah, Doolittle Raid, it really doubles down on the meat. I mean, every single phase is an enthralling chapter of a basic 4-part series that really captures this in even better detail than Dam Busters, which I thought Dam Busters was incredible for the exhaustive research that was done for it and how they mapped that research into a real experience that felt like you were there. Scope. Dam Busters was, if you can imagine it, take Google Earth and then you narrow down and you narrow down and you narrow down and you narrow down into someone's driveway. That's the detail. In Dam Busters, you're at the level. You're 60 feet above. Oh, if you do it right, you're 60 feet above the surface of the water, heading towards that target in this plane with this crew and these attack vectors all around you. Doolittle Raid. Imagine Google Earth and it drops down and it narrows down to the neighborhood level. And that's really where it stops, is at that neighborhood level, trading up from the perfectly claustrophobic feel of Dam Busters to a more spatial plan of action for your crew. And I think it is a satisfying spatial presentation in the attack sense. Attacking a city, you want to feel like you left lots and lots of crappy damage all over the place. Dam Busters, you're trying to burst a dam. City, you're trying to just like nail them all, leave marks. Where's the explosions? It's anyway. So what do I like about this game? This may surprise you. I like a lot about this game. The map it's intuitive. It's well laid out. It's excellent information presentation. Where it might look daunting at first, but it's really not. Everything is really well arranged and laid out so that you never have to overthink any particular aspect, because you can always go down through the steps, making your plans, moving, you know, like almost like a little maze, kind of a very simple maze. The systems feed into each other, and you see that you've got the systems, you know, from all your planning starting to manifest themselves later on in the naval aspect. Then they manifest further in the flight. Then they manifest again in the attack, and then the landing and the denouement and such. In Dam Busters, critical decisions, critical trade-off decisions were alive and well, but it is way more so in this game. For example, your very first choice in the game is what impacts the very last thing that happens in the game, which is landing your craft after the fight. I mean, it's crazy. Planning for the unknown without descending into just chaos. Like, I think this is going to happen, I'm going to aim for this, I'm going to plan for this, anything could happen, we don't really know, but we're going to make our best guess. Trade-offs are the name of the game. I mean, you want to add everything. Like Agricola, you can never quite have enough, so you don't quite get everything you want to without paying a dear price for it. You know, there are mitigating elements, which means, you know, the player can ultimately face his own choices, not just random luck of the die. Yes, there is die rolling here, and yes, it has an impact, but if you choose to, you know, take a few shortcuts here, and that happens to be a place where the die rolls aren't in your favor, you're in for a long mission. And that's an extreme example. This is a game, this is a narrative game, so ultimately, yeah, things could go right. You could wind up not even actually, like, bombing Tokyo. You could end up back at Pearl Harbor with your tail between your legs. You know, but at the same time, it's not like, oh, this is a crapshoot. Who knows? None of my choices matter. They matter. They matter in a big way. You just have to understand the trade-offs, which is kind of the key word here, trade-offs. Yeah, the sequential nature of the game, which has often been considered like, that's not very interesting. You know, so that's one of the criticisms that the Enemy Coast Ahead type games have, is that they're too linear, they're too storybook-like, and I disagreed with that, but I understand the rationale for that. But the sequential nature of the game, one of the things is you don't get overwhelmed. You're dealing with one aspect at a time. Like I said, when I rearrange the chits, I don't have to look at the 40 different compartments of chits. I go grab the ones that matter now, then next, and next, and next. It's kind of a squishy recipe that you kind of weave through to go, okay, I think we're gonna go this way. Each of the phases stands in its own right. I think I mentioned that before, but it's not, you know, there's no preludes here. Every single aspect of it, and I hope that comes through once I do the full playthrough, where I actually go ahead and make the decisions and show you each and every aspect of it, will shine through. This is not an instant gratification game. When you make that first choice of when you're going to inform people where you're going to land, you have to wait the entire game to find out how that really actually panned out. And that's not the only thing. When you outfit your aircraft, you're going to have to wait till you get over Tokyo to find out how well that went, which is towards the latter part of the game. This is not an instant gratification game. And the planning phase, oh, I love it. It's like a Rube Goldberg dashboard of gears and pulleys. You're turning just right, just so, to get just the outcome you really hope you want, except you throw die rolling into it. The naval phase, cat and mouse, feels real cat and mouse. Flight phase is a tension hike, handling the winds, can you make, you know, making the progress, watching your fuel, just like you would in your life. The attack phase, glorious. I will be glad to show that very soon. It gives you a strafing-like feel. It really does feel like you're strafing, you know, okay, it's bomber, you're not going to strafe, but you get the idea. You got this, like, okay, now I'm zoned in, I'm going to do this. We're circling around Tokyo, let's find these targets, let's nail these. We spent our last, you know, this entire year planning for this. Let's do it, guys, kind of attitude. You know, you're striking first like a ninja, and then as more bomber flights go over, then the defenses awaken, and suddenly then you're just going like, okay, what can we hit and steer away from these to do, you know, as much damage as possible, in the hopes of the guys before you really hit the expected targets. Landing, you know, how many games you go where like the whole meat of it is you get there, you do the attack, yeah, and then there's some sort of like hand waving, and then they all landed. That ain't this. Landing is a huge part of it. It's like you hit the apex of the attack, and then you drill down into the landing. There's still a long ways to go. Yeah, it is not just we attacked and then magical things happened and some of us survived. That doesn't happen here, and that's actually a really cool thing, because you go into the denouement phase. I hope I said it right. Where you really go, okay, you know, this is where you kind of tie up the loose ends of a story, per se. Like, hey, whatever happened to X? You know, the crews, the ships, the plane, you know, stuff like that. And that's where we really kind of find out, because that all feeds into the final, which is how well did you do? And there's a much broader result outcome options that you could receive. It's not as simple as your, you know, A through F will give you D minus. No, you really do get some really vivid outcome generations from this, and very variable, which adds a lot to the replay value. I think that in general it's much more rich and varied than Dam Busters in this respect, because it has a larger set of parameters and outcome variables. The cons, the things I don't like about it: there's a paper map. I'm not a fan of those. I know some people go, it's inevitable and it's cheaper and all that stuff, but if any game deserves a mounted map, I would think this one would. I mean, yeah. Nevertheless, $20 glass plate at Home Depot and you're doing fine. So that's not really anything mitigation. So in summary, Mr. White has done it again. He has provided us with a narrative, a rich story told across an exhaustively, historically researched journey in kind of an ABC miniseries fashion. There's no prelude phases to this. There's no meaningless choices. There's no end of interesting and thematic decisions to make that are all woven together in lockstep. Dam Busters, if you have that one, this is kind of a no-brainer. If you have Dam Busters and you like it, I really would be shocked if you didn't absolutely love Doolittle Raid. It's clear that they took the next steps, that they evolved this game, that while they kept the core elements that you would expect from Enemy Coast to Heads, they really went to town on this one. This was made for Doolittle Raid, not made as as the next Dam Busters-like game. You love a good story. You love being in a good story, being able to pull the strings and affect the outcomes. This is the one. So once again, Doolittle Raid, highly recommended for anyone who loves, you know, taking a single player rich narrative story. It probably takes a couple hours to play once you know what you're doing, but those couple hours are going to be filled with vivid recollections and memories of your story as it's told. It really is something you're gonna remember. Every single session of this is gonna have some sort of memory, some sort of memorable thing, something that will tweak your mind and say, yeah, I remember that when I did that, and this happened. That's the trademark of a great solo game. So once again, Doolittle Raid, highly recommended. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Harebrained Games.